Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Keith Sellers. I'm President and CEO of the Washington, D.C. Economic Partnership, and I'd like to welcome you all to the WDC House Futures Forum, my 3 o'clock session on embracing a self-driving future. Washington, D.C. is on the forefront of a pilot program in an ever-automating world dependent on access and transportation. The city has been able to create a variety of programs to help solve the first and final mile with mobility solutions that set the standards for the future. Presented by Ford Motor Company, discover how the district is engaging with Ford to develop self-driving vehicles to help better serve communities, residents, and business across the city. I'd like to now introduce our panelists, Joe Provenzano, Associate Director for Ford Motor Company, Steve Moore, Executive Director, Southwest Business Improvement District, David Alpert, Executive Director, DC Sustainable Transportation, and Lucinda Babers, Deputy Mayor, Office of the Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure.
Keith, thank you. Thank you very much. Really excited to be here. How's everybody doing this afternoon? Awesome. All right, great. You should be really happy after that baseball game last night. Really, really exciting. So I love to talk AVs. I love to talk self-driving vehicle technology. There's a huge component of collaboration when we talk about that from a Ford perspective when we work with cities. So we're definitely going to touch on that today. A little bit about myself, Joe Provenzano. I have been with Ford my entire career. A background in engineering, product development side, also on the manufacturing side, and I've been with our AV business team for the last couple years. I manage all of our in-market operations, so bringing our AV services to life as we go to market in the next couple years. I want to start out by thanking Keith and his team at WDC, the Economic Partnership. They've been great partners, him and Devin, in all the work that they've done with us since we announced Washington, D.C. As one of our deployment cities last year. It's truly a great partnership that we value. As we go through today, a big focus is going to be on collaboration. We know that that's key to bringing the technology to market. And so what I wanted to start out in doing, we have a phenomenal panel. I love the topic, embracing the self-driving future. What I wanted to do is give each of the panelists a couple of minutes to tell us a little bit about themselves and provide a little bit of background before we get into the discussion. So David, do you want to lead us off?
Sure, thank you very much, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm David Alpert. I am the Executive Director of DC Sustainable Transportation and also of Greater Washington. DCST is a coalition with government officials, advocacy organizations, and business leaders from the District of Columbia who collaborate to identify shared priorities for DC transportation and help work together to move everything forward. The Southwest Bid is one of our board members of the organization, and people from the DC government participate regularly in the work that we do. DCST is focusing on improving bus priority corridors, curbside management, and also looking at the impact of future technologies like autonomous vehicles on the District of Columbia. The other organization that I run, which is tied in with it, Greater Washington, is a media organization which publishes a website that you may be familiar with, or if not, I encourage you to take a look, about transportation planning and other issues like that.
Thanks, Dave.
Good afternoon. I'm Lucinda Babers. I am the new Deputy Mayor for Operations and Infrastructure. It is a new cluster within the Mayor's Office, Mayor Muriel Bowser, and I'm delighted to be here. Thank you so much. So in this new office, we have brought together 2 of the main agencies that are focused on autonomous vehicles, and that is the Department of Motor Vehicles, which I was the director forever, it seems like, and the Department of Transportation, so DDOT. And as we have this discussion and we talk about collaborating, it is very important. There are some conceptions that we're going to talk about, misconceptions, some of it, as it relates to autonomous vehicles. Bottom line is they're coming, they're on the way. We're delighted to be partnering with Ford, and I'm looking forward to some great discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucinda.
I'm Steve Moore. I'm with the Southwest Bid. The Southwest Bid is one of 11 business improvement districts in the city. It's roughly the 500 acres that's south of the National Mall. And so the Anthem is there, SPY is there, the Museum of the Bible is there. And all of these entities, in addition to the wharf itself, arrived almost at the same time. And it created enormous transportation issues, concerns, problems. If you've been to the Anthem, you probably know what I mean, right? So imagine that the planning for the wharf early on, or the Anthem, which at the time we called Wharf Hall, never included the words Uber or Lyft. And now that's the second biggest Uber and Lyft pickup and drop-off point in the region. And the Anthem, which only thought it would maybe do 50 or so shows a year, does 150. More people go to the Anthem annually than go to see soccer games. It exploded. And a bid which wants to hang up banners and do fun stuff in parks has to get into the transportation business in a way we never anticipated. And one of the things that happened on the road to that was, should we think about what's happening next in transportation? What's happening with driverless vehicles? Is there something we could be doing in that space?
Great, thanks. And I think before we get into the actual panel discussion, I want to sort of frame what we're going to try to accomplish. So I want to give a little overview of what our plan is at Ford as far as our vision on bringing self-driving vehicle services to market. And then we want to transition into what are the things we need to do in collaboration with, obviously, a great panel here of different perspectives across the district on preparing for that, and what are things that we need to be thinking about, and what are priorities that we need to solve for. So at a really high level, Ford has announced 3 current launch cities. Obviously, Washington, D.C. is one, Miami, and then we just announced Austin, Texas last week. And so we're planning on bringing in partnership with Argo AI, who's our self-driving vehicle system partner and developer. We're going to bring self-driving vehicle technology via services to those deployment markets. So as we go to market, we will own and operate fleets of vehicles with a focus on moving people and moving goods. One of the things that I think really separates the way that we're approaching it at Ford compared to some of our competitors is we're not just developing the self-driving vehicle. Obviously, that's a necessity, so it's going to be fully integrated with one of our vehicle platforms, which we think is a strong advantage. The other thing is developing a full ecosystem of what we're doing with that vehicle. What are the services that we're providing? So we've really focused on how we're going to orchestrate that fleet. A huge priority has been the collaboration with the cities that we're going to. All of the cities are different. We're going to get a lot of discussion today about the needs and the specific things that we need to think about as we bring those services to the district. But not all of those apply to Miami, and not all of those apply to Austin. So there's a lot of learning that we're doing in process to make sure that we bring a human-focused service that can provide value to our partners, our city partners, and then our end consumers at the end of the day. So I think a good place to start with that high-level overview is that collaboration piece. And to kick off the questions, David, I wanted to start with you because at DCST, you guys have done a lot of work on your recent research into the impact of AVs across the district. So if you could, maybe give the group today a little bit of background and history about that project, and then maybe some of the big takeaways that you guys have formed from the research that you've done.
Thanks. Happy to do that. So DCST was asked by the District Department of Transportation and the DC Council about a year ago to conduct a study of the impact of autonomous vehicles on the district, and by extension the region. They asked about the district, but it's all very much intertwined. The DC Council funded this study, and we worked very much hand in hand with the folks at DDOT on that. Consultant AECOM performed most of the analysis for the study. What we tried to do is look at a wide range of potential impacts of autonomous vehicles. What would they mean for traffic and mobility? What would they mean for seniors and people with disabilities? What would they mean for jobs? What would they mean for tax revenue? Lots of different ways that autonomous vehicles could have an impact on the district. What we did for thinking about the study was essentially to look at and model 4 different scenarios for what autonomous vehicles could mean. 2 of them were ones that don't involve very much government involvement. 2 ways that the market might evolve. And of course, these are just 2 of many possible ways. And to the extent that we can predict what would happen as a consequence, it's looking through a fuzzy crystal ball, and we can get a good sense. But of course, any amount of prediction isn't going to tell us exactly what's going to happen. But the 2 possible futures that we looked at with low government involvement, one was that mainly people start buying autonomous vehicles that work on freeways, but not in urban areas, not in denser areas with a lot of people walking or biking or police having blocked off a road or traffic lights. But people can live in a suburban or exurban area, drive their car to an on-ramp, then they work, take a nap, watch television, whatever, while their car goes down the freeway, and then it beeps or something when they're ready, when it's time to get off. What would that mean? Likely, among other things, that means that people would end up living farther out in the region, saying it's okay if I have a really long commute because I can get some work done or take a nap or something like that. Probably not particularly good for the urban centers like the district in that kind of an environment. Another one is that what we get soon is the autonomous vehicle that can operate in all of these types of settings that the way Ford and Argo are working on trying to design now. And probably those are owned and operated by companies that provide fleet services, an Uber and a Lyft, a UPS and FedEx for the delivery side. Whether it's those companies or other companies, maybe it's a Ford company itself. We obviously not predicting what company it is, but you have that sort of thing. People can get a service, and that service is autonomous transportation. The other scenarios that we looked at were, does government get much more involved? Because what happens in those first 2 scenarios is that the amount of driving will go up a bunch, and also the amount of traffic congestion will go up. Because, well, it's a lot easier to take a ride. In the second scenario, for example, it's like if you could take things like Uber now or get deliveries, but they're even cheaper than they are today. Well, people probably aren't going to want to wait for a bus or even go to the metro station if they can just get essentially a private chauffeur. But that's going to mean a lot more people on the road, and that's going to mean more traffic congestion, which will make people's travel times go up. It'll take longer to get places. So what are some things that can be done about that? There are 2 types of government actions that we were looking at, ways that government can shape the way this evolves, but still in a way that's supportive of the development of AV technology. How can the district or other governments help companies that are working on this build viable business models that grow the economy, that grow people's salaries, that grow jobs, and that also help people get where they need to go faster, more smoothly, not pollute as much, and that sort of thing. And those 2 were, if we had essentially bus lanes or lanes for sort of high occupancy vans of some kind that pick up a bunch of people in a neighborhood and maybe take them to a destination, or if we can price the roads. The main things that the study found was with all of those scenarios, so even with government taking more intervention, there is more driving, that there probably will be more people taking cars more of the time, more distances, because you can get some work done while taking a trip. You can even put a kid in the car and they could be taken to school or something like that. Certainly seniors and people with disabilities can have a lot more freedom than they do today. And this brings a lot of real benefits. People would have more mobility in a lot of ways. But we also have to then contend with sort of the major drawbacks potentially of more driving happening. One is congestion. How do we make it so it's not more crowded? How do we make it so there's not more pollution? How do we make it so that people aren't getting hurt more? Because right now, more driving generally means worse safety. And how do we make sure to contend with equity, ensuring that the impacts of this are benefiting areas that have often been on the losing end of transportation decisions in the past? Fortunately, the actual amount of car ownership people will have can go down. If we can electrify vehicles, that can really do a lot to manage the amount of emissions that come from them. And if we have some of those interventional scenarios that I talked about, the high occupancy carpooling or vans or the road pricing, that can actually mean that even though there's more driving happening, the amount of time it takes people to get from one place to the other can go down. But what we did find is that without action by the public sector or without a partnership that involves the public sector and private sector working together, the travel times will go up. It will take people longer to get places. The equitable impacts will be harder hitting on areas where people already face longer car trips today, like areas east of the Anacostia River, which in DC have the longest commutes currently. And that gets worse if we sort of don't have that partnership between the public sector and the private sector to figure out the right business models and the right regulatory framework. We can ensure that the vehicles are safe and that will cut down on the safety element. And overall, making sure that sort of we think about how we want to shape the evolution of autonomous vehicles through their evolution. This is just a sort of quick preview of the findings of the report that we've done. That report will be issued pretty soon, I believe, from the DC government to the DC Council, and then the report will be public. And in October, was it 24? Later in October, we're having another forum that DCST and Ford are collaborating on. That's going to be hosted by the World Resources Institute and NUMO. And I will present in more detail the findings of the study. If you'd like to go to that, you can go to ggwash.salsalabs.org/AV. That's ggwash.salsalabs, all one word, .org/AV. And I'd love to have you come to that and hear all about this in a lot more depth than we have time for now.
David, some really good information, and I think there's a lot of depth to that, right? So there's a lot of different scenarios that you looked at. Obviously, the second one from a Ford perspective is very applicable. We're going to have a geofenced area where we have self-driving vehicle services and fleets of vehicles working within that geofenced area. So it's probably, I think, applicable to the second part of that study that you did. But in thinking about that, Lucinda, moving over to you, there's a lot of information that David's team has gone out and gotten. In bringing this successfully to market takes that collaboration. What are some of the priorities and focus from your side, from an operations and infrastructure as Deputy Mayor that you're focused on that you think need to be priorities as we start having these discussions?
Thank you, Joe. Well, first of all, we're very concerned hearing the results of the study, but we're very excited. Here in the district, we really embrace multiple modes of transportation. As you can tell from the automobiles, the scooters, the mopeds, the cyclists, the pedestrians, we want to take everything into consideration. And so we really have jumped on the bandwagon in terms of embracing the autonomous vehicle technology because it's coming and it is coming sooner than we may think. One of the things that I think that the study highlighted that we're concerned about is the fact that autonomous vehicles are going to bring more driving, more congestion. I think that initially when we started thinking about vehicles driving themselves, we thought to ourselves it would reduce congestion because everybody would just, use kind of the ride-sharing model where the vehicles just zip around and they pick up several people, they drop you off, and there's no real ownership. What the study has showed us is that, no, this is absolutely not the case. What we're going to be seeing first in the Washington, D.C. area is we're going to be seeing autonomous vehicles that are ready for the highway. Now, of course, what does D.C. have? Not many highways. So instead, we're going to be getting vehicles that are autonomous coming further out where people have, caught a quick nap. And then hopefully the beeping or whatever mode that wakes them up and says, you are entering the district. Wake up and take control. And hopefully, they do that because they will.
I think, Lucinda, I just want to make sure we ground everyone because I don't want to go, because all of the things that you're saying, I understand. I just want to make sure we ground everyone on Ford's perspective on what we're bringing to market, because I think it's really important. It's really important to understand that there's a variety of different OEMs that are out there that are pursuing this technology. And there's a variety of different ways that they're trying to implement it. I don't want to speak to what other OEMs are doing, but from the standpoint of what Ford's bringing to market here in DC, it's not highway driving. It's specific urban movement of people and goods. So it'll be focused at low speed within the urban center, where we're looking at working our way across all 8 wards to find solutions that work from a business perspective with the technology that we're going to get. These are fully autonomous vehicles that are mapped to the geofenced area that they're operating in. And so some of the things that we're alluding to, and I know some of the work that David's done, he's looked at multiple scenarios of how AVs could operate in the future. I just want to try to narrow our focus so we don't go down a different path. But from a Ford perspective, it's really focused on, you know, the downtown urban setting and how we address that. So
Joe, I was getting to that.
Okay.
See? I tell you. No, because then once they get into the district, what we are trying to do is, first of all, the Department of Transportation, we're trying to look at the autonomous vehicle as we look at the current automobiles. And that means that when we are doing the streetscapes, you know, the streetscape projects are when the Department of Transportation goes in, looks at mostly intersections. We look at putting in bike lanes. We look at putting in wider sidewalks. We are starting to talk about and to say, and is there anything that we need for autonomous vehicles when we're doing these projects? Because we do recognize that Ford and other companies are going to come into the urban landscape, and they're going to, they're going to engineer these vehicles to get around the district. And so what we need, and the easiest way to do it, is to make sure that when we're looking at these projects, whether they're 2 years away, 5 years away, 10 years away, have we taken into consideration autonomous vehicles and what they may need as part of this project? And we are having these discussions. Now, the Department of Motor Vehicles is also having the discussion on governance and on what exactly is it going to take to register your vehicle, because when you're not driving, who has a license or who's responsible? And we're also talking about, do you need a license? In the perfectly autonomous world where you're not going to have to drive, do we need to license you? So there are many things that people are not necessarily thinking about that we as a government are thinking about, and that we're discussing with these other companies as they bring this new technology to market. So it's exciting. It's the forefront of a new technology, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate on it, because it's going to take years before this happens. And Joe may be able to share what Ford is thinking about in terms of how many years. He may have some insight into that. But it's not something that's going to happen overnight.
yeah, no, that's a good point. And I think to my point earlier, there's a lot of information out there, but specifically Ford, as I mentioned earlier, bringing fleets of vehicles to these designated cities. So we plan to bring commercialization of our fleet services and of the production vehicle in 2021. So when we say it's out there, it's going to be a very specific area where we're looking to build those partnerships, collaborate with the city, and make sure that we're bringing it to the city in a way that's valuable to the residents, our partners, and the end consumers, so they have an awesome product.
Can I add one quick thing?
Sure.
I just want to say, amplifying what Joe was saying and Lucinda, that I do see with those scenarios it being probably some amount of a race, and I don't know what's going to win, which companies bringing which kind of business models are successful at doing it first, right? Is it someone like Ford, which is trying to create these services for people in urban areas, which is what is in the district's interest to see the market evolve as, or is it going to be someone, and there are many people, who's going to try to develop cars that are sold to individual people and they just take on the freeways, and there's other companies that are doing that. I think that's very much not best for the district or other cities. So how do we kind of help the district be an example for other cities of, look, here's how we can have the development of autonomous vehicles form in a way that creates a business model that works for a company like Ford and that meets the values of the district, or will it be sort of something else? And the more that we're a leader, I think the more we can help that happen.
Right. No, I agree 100%, because there's specific ways that we want to try to bring this and leverage the technology. It has to empower people at the end of the day. It has to be based around human design. We want the technology to work and leverage success for people, to empower freedom. So we have to be thoughtful. Some of the things that you've brought up, there's a reason that we're starting early and we're not bringing vehicles to the street tomorrow as far as the services, because it takes time to work through that, validate the business models and the full ecosystem. So appreciate those comments. Steve, let's move on to you. As we've talked earlier today, Southwest bid, that area is just booming as far as growth. And it's sort of maybe is unique, and I think we found that across the district, there's different needs across all the different wards. There's different needs from neighborhood to neighborhood, and we need to take into consideration all of those. Can you talk to us a little bit about what your experience as far as challenges right now in the Southwest bid area, and then maybe some of the things that you're looking for as far as solutions from ABs?
Well, you can tell by the conversation we're having, on David's side, the enormous complexity of thinking through scenarios, trying to anticipate the future. And then with what the deputy mayor is saying about how do you govern this, who gets a driver's license, all that sort of stuff. We run a shuttle bus that runs roughly from the Hirshhorn down to the waterfront and back. And we thought, wouldn't it be interesting if that were a driverless vehicle? Or could we find an autonomous vehicle or some company to create a fleet there or to provide that service there? We did an RFI and invited half a dozen companies to come in and talk to us. And the kind of complexity here just exploded horizontally. What we wanted was, we want to try something. We understand that it's very complex, and we understand the regulatory side is from where we sit here today, really, really difficult. But what's first? Can we just get something on the street? And what would that have to be? And that language became low speed, below 25 miles per hour, fixed route up and down 10th Street in front of the Spy Museum, if you can picture that. And then with an assisted driver, in other words, with somebody there all the time, sitting there so that there was that insurance about how it works or how it would not work. So we then went out to the market and said, who wants to test this with us? And all the technology is moving, as you well know and we discussed, all this technology is moving at lightning speed. And when an accident happens in Tucson, Arizona, they pull way, way back, right? And they're not so confident anymore about, Steve, do you want a fleet of these? Can you sell us to the Smithsonian? What would it take for us to go from the Hirshhorn all the way over to baseball? So we're in sort of play a little bit with, hey, we've got this spot. If you've got an idea about how we would do sort of a shuttle, low speed in this space, good. We'll take it over to Lucinda. We'll find out how to license it, right? And then we'll have some place to start in terms of what David's study says is, where are we now, and where will this take us? What will these scenarios look like? The Southwest is complicated because all of the entertainment stuff exploded over at the Anthem at the Wharf. North is Smithsonian, 20 million visitors a year, and then a short hop over to soccer and baseball around a neighborhood where the neighborhood association is 55 years old. So it presents itself as a library, as rather a laboratory for what should we be testing? How would we just begin to kind of get ourselves into this space? So we wanted to promote the Southwest as a place to come and try things. I think that that's sort of where we sit right now.
Yeah, so there is opportunities, and I want to touch on the safety comment that you made too. From a Ford perspective, I think one of the things that we leverage, and it's an advantage, definitely a competitive advantage, is we've been developing vehicles for over 100 years. And so when we talk about FMVSS regulations on the engineering side, the safety side, we take all of the things that we've built over time and we build them into our process. So I can't speak on behalf of other OEMs or other competitors in the space, but we feel really confident in the way that we're progressing the technology because it's so focused on our core values of what we've done over time. And then it's really been a great partnership because Argo has really made safety their culture. Like when you talk about safety and we talk about all the different things that we have to implement, it becomes down to thoughtfulness built on integrity. Like you have to be genuine in what you're trying to do, and you have to be transparent. And so we've really worked hard to make sure that we're leveraging all of those advantages that we have. And then when we do get opportunities, like Steve's saying, if there's an opportunity in the Southwest bid district or if it's somewhere else, we first want to work with the mayor's office, understand what are the implications, work with NHTSA. We've done a ton of collaboration with NHTSA this year on what do we have to do relative to making sure that when we go test the scenario, it's within the standards that make sense for the community, it meets our expectation as Ford Motor Company from the highest amount of integrity and safety before we proceed in a scenario like that. But I think there's a lot of value to what you're saying, Steve, because we know over the last 2 years since we've begun this journey in starting to work in our 3 deployment cities, that there's a tremendous amount of value from learning and doing. And that can be done in a safe and appropriate way, which is absolutely critical and important to Ford Motor Company. So those are opportunities where we can start saying, hey, what are those things that we need to do? And then that's how we start learning, because again, we have the opportunity to take that information back and tailor our services to meet the needs that we're seeing across the district.
Well, that's no small thing, right, if I may? What you're saying, particularly the sort of the depth of the company, because the first question that comes when you put a driverless vehicle on the street is liability. So where does that land? Does the bid pick that up? Can I push that back to you? Does Lucinda want it? These are really, no, right. These are complicated questions.
Lucinda.
That was a quick no.
But I think that's a huge reason that Ford supports a legislative, federal framework that we're supporting and we're working across the industry to support. So it has to make sense and it has to meet our standards for us to move forward. Why don't we transition a little bit? We're talking a lot about the moving, from a Ford perspective, we're talking about moving people and moving goods in urban settings across cities, across the district. And one thing that you probably run into is there's not a lot of curb space. So how do we manage people getting in and out of AVs? How do we manage AVs from a delivery service? I was wondering if, and this is sort of open to all the panelists, what are some projects or thoughts on priorities on managing curb space? Are there different initiatives that you're currently looking at in the particular areas that you're in? And what are some of the needs or priorities that you guys have?
Well, I was going to start off with responding to that, Joe. So, like I said, autonomous vehicles, when it comes to what the city is focused on and how those autonomous vehicles are going to move around, they're going to move around no differently than current automobiles. And so one of the things that we are aware of is that we have concerns about our bike lanes being blocked, our streetcar lanes being blocked by taxis, rideshare companies dropping off people by loading vehicles, FedExes and things like that. And one of the things that we're focused on and that we are piloting is more drop-off spots where we can say, no, if you need to pick up someone or drop them off, you cannot go and pull into the bike lane right in front of their home or business. You need to go to the corner. You need to go to a spot that is safe and accessible. And we would be looking at, for autonomous vehicles, for them to do the exact same thing, which then makes perhaps your job a little bit more complicated, because when someone does say, I want to go to this address, you're going to need to know that autonomous vehicle can't stop right there at that address. It needs to go to the nearest corner, so that's just added fun for you all.
Yeah, and so, but I think that's actually a good point. But it's a complex problem, right? We're not saying that we have every single solution across the board right now. I can give examples. For example, if you get in an Uber or Lyft today, you get out of your vehicle and you leave the door open, what happens? The driver's not happy with you, probably gets out and shuts the door. When we come to market and you get out of the door and you leave it open, we have to have a solution for that. So a big part of what we're doing is we're identifying what are all the pain points to solve this, because to your point, Lucinda, we can't come to a city and then operate in a way that's not seamless for the people that want to find value in our service. So if we're not trying to get ahead of that and collaborate and work on solutions and think outside the box and think of infrastructure, and it's not just, self-driving vehicles are not just, it's not a silver bullet. It's a part of a broader mobility solution that has to be bought into by the broader city landscape. And those are the things that we want to try to work on. So does it make our job more difficult? Yeah, but we just have to be more thoughtful, and we have to think, how are ways that we can solve these problems? Because at the end of the day, people are going to want to use Ford self-driving vehicle services if they enjoy the services, if they're adding value to the city and their partners. And those are the things that we're striving for and working for now. But I agree with you, it is a complex problem, and it makes it more fun. Other thoughts on curb space?
Yeah, well, and to add to all that, we use an enormous amount of the space on our roads today for parking, right? Many streets, both sides, especially outside downtown, have cars parked there, right? And a lot of people need those spaces because they're owning cars and they're parking it on the street. But in an autonomous vehicle world, especially when the autonomous vehicles can operate in the urban areas, people won't need that. You can, why have your own car when you can just press a button and one comes to you? Some people, someone who does a lot of deliveries might need it, but, well, they can use an autonomous delivery vehicle too, maybe. And so in all the scenarios we looked at, while I said the amount of driving went up, the amount of car ownership always went down. We could have the mobility served with fewer individual vehicles because it's more of these fleet vehicles. That means that everyone who now says, well, I really need there to be a lot of parking on my street because there's not a metro station near me, the bus isn't very frequent, it doesn't go where I need to go, I need to go to the suburbs, whatever reason, there's lots of reasons that people, need to have or feel like they need to have a car now. A lot of those, for a lot of people, might be reduced and people don't need it, so we can repurpose a lot of that space. Already, though, we're seeing that we use a lot of the space for the parking of vehicles in a way that mostly harkens back to a little bit, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, way of using road space. We didn't have Uber and Lyft back then. People weren't getting as many deliveries on Amazon or grocery deliveries from Instacart or, food deliveries from all the services that will bring food to you. So already, even before we have automation, we ought to use more of our curb space for these deliveries or for pickup and drop-offs from things like Ubers and Lyfts, because why not? We know that more people are taking them and not so many people are taking their private cars already today. And with automation, that will just accelerate that enormously. And so we just won't need, and people won't be disadvantaged if we take a lot of the curb space and use it in the future, but even we could do a lot of that now for picking up, dropping off, delivering, and so forth.
And those are all ways that we need to be creative and collaborate and think about how can we best position the technology. So are there things that are happening during the day right now that we could push to different times? There's all of these potential solutions we need to talk about and pursue in a broader discussion on what makes sense from a complete mobility solution in the future. So I agree with that.
Right, and DC government, we're already looking at, especially with the businesses and receiving deliveries, we're looking at nighttime deliveries, and we're trying to push them towards that nighttime delivery so that they do not impede the parking in the loading zones and the bike lanes and the sidewalks sometimes. And so we're definitely trying to be more forward-thinking as it relates to what can we do now, and whatever we think about that can help now absolutely will be critical to helping us when autonomous vehicles come about. And I just want to note too, a lot of you all don't know how many autonomous vehicles are actually on the roadways. There are a lot. You just don't know about it because our law still requires for there to be a driver behind the seat. But there are a lot of people, there's a lot of testing and driving going on with autonomous vehicles. There just happens to be a driver.
So good point. So I just want to speak to Fords because I can't speak, again, to the other OEMs and the other competitors out there. But our first approach was through the mayor's office on getting approval before we came. And we currently have about a handful of self-driving vehicles that are on the roads. We have a terminal in Ward 5, and they're working their way on focusing on mapping and understanding the infrastructure. Because you have to understand, from city to city, the infrastructure is different as well. There's more complexities here in Washington, D.C., to the point that you made. A lot of the infrastructure was built a very long time ago, and the intention wasn't cars at that time, and it probably wasn't envisioning self-driving vehicles in the future. So those are things that we have to think about. Relative to safety operators, we call them test specialists. So we currently operate with 2 test specialists in every single vehicle. Our partner, Argo AI, like I said earlier, they really have developed and done a wonderful job on creating a culture of safety. A lot of times in the industry, disengagement and taking over control is frowned upon, but the way that they approach it and the way that they look at it is every time there's an opportunity to take control, there's an opportunity to learn, so it's encouraged. And then we have 2 safety operators, so someone's in charge of the controls in the vehicle, and then there's a co-pilot that's basically monitoring all of the information that's being cascaded so that they have an understanding and they can work as a team to continue to operate in a safe manner as we continue to map and test. But those are things that need to be considered and need to be thought about, and that's where that federal legislation can help create some framework for some consistency.
But you were talking about curbs a few minutes ago.
Yeah, we're at curbs.
So the thing, too, that's necessary now is we have to be able to respond quickly. And so the wharf is open, and we find out very quickly that the wharf has 2 loading docks with 16-wheel or tractor trailers. And the bands like performing at the Anthem, so that the bands now come with 10, 15 buses, 20 restaurants and bars, CVS getting deliveries, all roughly at the same time. The curbs need to be managed like as if it were an air traffic controller. You almost have to book the time in, and we find a company to do that, right? DDOT finds a company, brings it to us. And I think in addition to being able to respond quickly and try things, is you have to kind of be generous a little bit about it's not going to be perfect. We're going to learn a lot about what time buses get there and whether or not the apps work, and we're not going to be able to manage every U-turn that someone doesn't like. But we're going to have to get into the space a little bit and understand our own limitations in terms of how we thought it was going to work, and then take on, we're going to have to do this differently. We're going to have to throw away those things that haven't worked anymore, and we're going to have to try things, even if those things aren't perfect.
Right, and it's part of that progression, I think, and we're big supporters of learning and working and collaborating and getting that feedback, so you have data points that you can then go leverage and start to understand and see how those translate to broader solutions and mobility solutions. Really good points. David, I wanted to swing back to the study because obviously in your study there's a lot of stuff, and focus more on the part that applies to how Ford's going to operate. You mentioned there's going to be increased driving. There's going to be there's good and bad things that happen from bringing AVs, and depending how thoughtful and collaborative you are in that approach. What were the key things that you think you need to partner on with the industry, and what are things that we need to focus on to be successful and prepare for that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that for making AVs be able to bring in the right kind of environment requires, for one thing, the governments like the district to kind of decide what the values are that they want to have, and then really work in partnership with the industry to say, how do we build the business models that facilitate that? The district wants to see an equitable distribution of services. So like the district is doing with the scooters now, where it's saying, okay, scooter companies, we'd like to encourage you to expand, but we're going to maybe limit that number, but also you need to have more scooter service in Ward 7 and 8 in particular, East Anacostia River, but also in all parts of the district. So when things like Car2Go came into DC, the district demanded the same thing and said, this is a value. Equity is going to be an important value, and it should be. That's good for the district to do that. So how do we design the way the products and the services are coming out to facilitate that? And for that matter, maybe we'll have, I'm curious, like maybe we'll have autonomous scooters that just come to you, in the future. I guess that's not what Ford's doing, but who knows?
I was on a scooter today, and I was actually driving it myself. So
very nice. Glad it was not autonomous.
It was not autonomous.
But that's one thing, right? And jobs. One thing I didn't get a chance to talk about regarding the study yet was the impact of jobs. And there have been other studies that went into more detail about this. There will be a lot of jobs lost. There will be a lot of jobs gained, as we've had with other kinds of technological advancement. But with autonomous vehicles, it's a lot of jobs and don't require college educations today, like driving buses, delivery trucks, taxis, things like that. Those can be good jobs for a lot of people who don't have college educations. And the jobs that are likely to be gained are programming autonomous vehicles, designing systems for them, a lot of things that relate to sort of more high skill, high technology related jobs as a general matter. And so how does the district work, and how do we work with industry to make sure that there are ways to help train the people whose jobs are likely to be lost to be able to move over to jobs that can be gained, or some people, who are a little bit older, it's generally not, when these kinds of technological advances happen, they're, at some age, people aren't as likely to be able to switch to a new job. So how do we make sure to provide for the needs and not have people be left behind as a consequence? And these are all things that it's early enough that we can think about. We can think about, how do we do that? How do we maximize the benefit, reduce the negatives? The change in jobs could mean a lot more tax revenue from the district. So how do we just because the high skilled jobs will be higher paying. So if that's the case and there's a lot more tax revenue from people working, that's terrific. But how do we make sure that tax revenue is then used to mitigate the impacts to the people who don't benefit?
Yeah, I think that's, I'll let you comment in a second, Lucinda. I think that's really important when you talk about jobs, because we know it's transformative, the technology, right? Some career paths are going to end, and it's going to open up other career paths. And we had a really good discussion this morning with Accenture about, it's not just retraining someone, it's providing new skills. So we talk about opportunities that we have to create. It's that time, to your point, David, it's time where we can be thoughtful. We know there's going to be an impact. How do we plan to make sure that we're on the positive side of the impact? And that's not just retraining people, it's providing new opportunities for skill developments. One of the things that we've done here in DC is with the Infrastructure Academy. So we have a collaboration with them and our vehicle operators through Argo on testing and becoming a curriculum to qualify to become a test operator within their program that they have here in the district. And that extends to some of our partnerships with dealers as far as training and other things of that nature. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. But those are things that we have to start thinking about, to your point, because we have this opportunity now. And if we're thoughtful about it, then we can take it and pursue it in a way where we can increase the positive impact as we go through the transition. Lucinda, did you have some comments?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to touch upon, David mentioning that several of our industries are going to change. And with autonomous vehicles, the district, we need to start bringing to the table all of our agencies that people haven't even thought about. Because it's not just partnerships with Ford and with taxi cab companies who may need to do retraining because those jobs will change. But we need to start looking at some of our other agencies, such as the police department. And we need to start bringing them to the table to say, what happens when you stop an autonomous vehicle?
No, I think to comment on that, I think that's a great question, and we've already engaged. Here in the city and then in Miami and our other launch cities, there's a significant effort to understand what are all those things. It goes back to what I said earlier. Someone leaves the door open and there's no driver. How does it get shut? Same thing. How does an emergency vehicle pull over a self-driving vehicle? Those are all things we have to solve for. We cannot have solutions in place to progress and move forward with that technology. So those are discussions that we're engaged in, and we're looking for that supportive framework on how we do that. But we're pursuing and pushing and having those discussions now, because all of those things become critical to successful services at the end of the day.
Right, and then they go to our economic development in terms of our businesses. Because, right now, it's very important for businesses, for housing, to be close to a metro, close to public transportation. When autonomous vehicles come, that's out the window. And it's a whole new world for businesses, for people and where they want to live. And they want to live in Pennsylvania or wherever they want to live, and they want to take a nap. But in terms of businesses, we're looking at it from a viewpoint with the city. Ward 7 and 8, some of our wards that the businesses just aren't there, because how do you get the people there when there's not necessarily the metro right there? Autonomous vehicles will then allow those types of discussions to say, these are viable places because we can get the people there because there's another mode of transportation. So it's all really important, and like I said, it's really exciting and things that we have to start talking about.
Yeah.
It's a big idea.
And when you say that too, there are unknowns, but those are things that we have to work through and solve.
Yeah.
Steve, I had a question for you, and maybe you could talk a little bit about all the effort you guys went through, and as far as pursuing some different things as far as AVs, and then where you're at with the mobility innovation district.
So we partnered with DDOT to chase a grant. Actually, we've done this twice. One, to be a testing area. So to the federal DOT, that 10th Street be an area where you could test driverless vehicles. And University of Michigan has a test ground. Other places have these testing areas. And they sell themselves, interestingly, as an urban, like a replication of an urban environment. And of course, you fill out the application and say, well, I'm not replicating. We actually got one, so why don't we test vehicles here? And the idea would be to introduce sort of our own ability to see what's on the street and what's happening. And then more recently, we did, with DDOT, a much larger grant request around the same idea. But now what federal DOT wants to do is collect information. What's occurring in the vehicles, how many passengers they are, and then tons and tons of information about the technology. All the LiDAR and radar and what equipment's being used and what you learn in using it. The tough news about doing these grants is that it's not a meritocracy. And so a team like the DDOT team that we work with for months to put it together, you know at best that you've got a 10% chance because you're going to land in a stack of people that are wired into the hill differently or understand sort of the politics of the moment in a way that DC cannot. And in fact, you have to partner. A red state has to partner with a blue state, and you'll only get a fraction of the money. It's very big. This was brand new to me, all of that. But what fell out of that for us was what we learned in kind of writing grants and understanding kind of what it is that we would want out of a process like that is similar to what David was just saying, which is, could we develop a shared vocabulary about what it is we're going for? What are our principles? What kind of things would be important to us? And could we name that? And the naming of that is, to Joe's point, a mobility innovation district. So if you went to our website, inside initiatives, you'd find Mobility Innovation District. And you can see the proposal that we kind of have said, as a result of writing up all of these grant requests, here's an idea for the way you would innovate, the kind of collaboration that you need, what you want to accomplish with a little area that wants to test vehicles of all kinds, not just shuttle buses, but what Joe is working on and more sort of micro-mobility, just to have a place to dump someone who walks in the door and says, how do we try this with you? How do we introduce our product in Washington? Is there a place where we can test what it is we're working on in a real urban environment? So I think after all of chasing the grants and working on those things with the great people at DDOT, it turned out that we said, well, what can we name this and then have an entity or have a place where when an opportunity comes in the door, we know how to convene and we know how to kind of problem solve around it.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example of where you've ended up in a good place to what is the next step? How do I progress? What are things that we can start looking at as solutions as we move and embrace, the self-driving future and emerging technologies? Lucinda, one more question for you. I think everybody's hit on it a little bit today. Self-driving vehicles doesn't solve mobility by itself, right? It's a part of a broader mobility solution. When you look across the district, what are opportunities you think, or what are priorities in the current transportation infrastructure across the district, and where maybe can AVs come in and play and be a part of a broader solution?
Yes, thank you, Joe. So we absolutely, like I said, have many, many, many projects that we can start engaging and collaborating with in terms of autonomous vehicles. DDOT has major projects in terms of streetscaping, redesigning, and trying to decide where are we and where do we want to go. It's like David said, the study basically said, where do we need to go to be ready for the future? And we know that we have a lot of work to do, and we know that there's a lot of different technology, because right now, unfortunately, the technology isn't necessarily all the same. There's geomapping, there's HD mapping, there's all sorts of different mapping that is being utilized. And we want to know what should we be doing? How do we move forward? And how do we move forward taking residents, businesses, tourists, commuters? I don't know if David mentioned, we're going to have to look at congestion pricing because it is going to bring more vehicles and more people into the city. But I think we're ready. We're ready to embrace the technology and to move forward in a manner that is thoughtful, yet we're going to try to move quickly.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because you have to utilize the current infrastructure of transportation as part of the broader solution. Obviously in dealing, in working in 3 different cities, we know the importance of that. And like I said, it becomes based on what are the needs and the unique characteristics of each of the deployment cities that we're working with. Why don't we, if we have about, I think, 5 minutes left, if we want to open it up to maybe some questions, unless anyone has any last thoughts, maybe we can open it up to some questions to anyone on the panel. This gentleman right here, there's a microphone right next to you.
Thank you. I'm Arnold King, and my question is, nobody answered the question. How do we drive automobile vehicle with no self-drive when there's not going to be a wheel on it, especially when it's going to be on the highway and so forth? Because it has to be talked about how to what a self-automobile and driving. That's going to be the key.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Are you talking about how are we executing that?
How do we drive a self-automobile vehicle with no wheel?
Okay. That gets a little more into a technical discussion, but obviously when we're developing these vehicles, there's a case where the steering wheel is obviously not needed, right? That's part of the federal framework that has to be put together and approved. And so we're working to support those discussions on how that's going to be executed and what we have to work by as we go into the future. But that's definitely a good point to bring up. Are there other questions right here in the front?
Am I loud enough?
Yeah, sure.
What things are the city doing? They've done wonderful work with regard to encouraging solar energy options for residential homes and commercial buildings. But I hear a lot of people who live in row houses say, I can't get a fully electric vehicle because there's not a good street side charging option. There aren't good charging options for this. And I'm sure you all have plans, and I'm kind of wondering about your plans in that regard.
And maybe repeat the question. I don't know if everyone can hear.
Right. So the question was, what are cities doing, and I guess the district specifically, in terms of providing electric charging stations for residents who have like row housing? So one of the things that the district we're in the process of complying with is the Clean Energy Act of 2018 that the DC Council passed. And as part of that act, we have to bring more electrical charging stations into the district. It is a mandate. We have to first develop a plan. And so we just were working on our 2020 performance plan priorities, and then our 2021 budget is getting ready to kick off. And that is something that we absolutely have as one of the priorities, that we have to put electrical charging stations where people most need them.
And in a future of autonomous vehicles, that's a really good policy to be doing now, because we need to electrify the vehicles before they're autonomous, because they're emitting a lot of pollution, and we're facing a major climate crisis. So that's fantastic. That's happening. When they're autonomous, there'll be other interesting challenges. Well, do they go to a charging center completely on their own? And then how do they kind of charge themselves? How does exactly that work? And do we have incentives to make sure that people, you do have electric vehicles? Do we have a differential charge if you're using that kind of autonomous Uber or autonomous UPS delivery? Is there a tax that is much higher if it's a gas-burning car and much lower for autonomous, so that the Uber or whatever has a strong economic incentive to create a fleet of electric vehicles that are providing these services instead of sticking with a gas-burning one?
Good point. I think we have time for one more question. What was your question?
Thank you. Hi, and I saw the insurance commissioner coming in as we mentioned about liability. I was wondering, what are the implications with regards to if I own an autonomous vehicle for insurance purposes?
I think what I'll do is I'll default to maybe either David or Lucinda on that one, because I know you guys are doing work on it. From our perspective, we're supporting the ongoing conversations about it.
Right, so currently there's a working group with the Motor Vehicle Association, and that is one of the things that they're looking at is how are we going to do the insurance? Because right now, you know that there's a combination throughout the country of uninsured motorists, and then there's certain jurisdictions that have a requirement for mandatory insurance. So that discussion is absolutely being discussed, and they have not yet put out what they're going to call their best practices, but they're going to put out a best practice and a recommended solution to that.
Thank you. I think, I don't know if there's any other comments. I guess I want to end by thanking everyone for their time today, coming, and it's exciting to see, like, obviously I live self-driving vehicles and the development and the progression every day. It's really exciting to see people come out that are interested in having the discussions, because it really takes that dialogue, questions, and being able to answer those questions, and how are we going to bring this in a meaningful way to market. So I really appreciate everyone's time. And again, I want to thank Devin and Kevin for all the support on WeDC for the future forums today. It's been a great discussion, and thanks again to our great panelists.
Thank you.